Peter, I've been trying to understand karma.
Good luck.
Theoretically, understand karma, not understand my karma. And as karma seems to be a description, it's not actually a description, but a catch-all phrase to cover human activity, I just was trying to figure out how useful it was as a concept.
Well, I think it's very useful as a concept because it addresses the relationship between human, apparent human existence and transcendental existence. Karma is the apparent patterning that circumstances seem to have. Mm-hmm. So your life, you might say, it's the narrative of your life, that things you seem to be here in this room and it happens to look like this at this moment, and these words happen to be being said, and so on and so forth. So all this intense degree of patterning that shows up as what your experience seems to look like just in general, comprehensive. But the opening where the transcendental comes into it is that patterning is only a result of averaging. It's a result of essentially dumbing down. Whereas if you're with if you're with the patterning as it actually is, it turns out to be absolutely fractal in nature and goes to infinity very rapidly. So it turns out to, even though it I talk about this fact a lot, and I think it's very hard to communicate, that there is a literally arbitrarily huge amount of pattern of specificity in our experience. Everything's experience is very, very specific. It looks exactly the way it looks right now. It doesn't look any other way, and now it looks exactly the way it looks now, and so on and so forth. So there's all of this specificity, but all the specificity is made out of infinity. So the specificity turns out to be absolutely without limitation in terms of being contained in the specificity itself. It's very hard for me to communicate. I haven't figured out a good, clear way to put that.
But the fractal nature of experience is that karma. It seems to be beyond description.
Yeah.
And it is only a concept in relation to reality. Otherwise, it is everything. If you don't have reality as a way of looking at karma, then karma is all-encompassing.
Yeah.
And so I just don't see the usefulness of the concept if you don't have the ability to look from the outside at your experience and the fractal nature of your experience. How is it useful? It just seems to me a concept that's a bit like the concept of God.
Yeah, well, I hear you. It is. To me, it's useful in the sense that the patterning, the apparent patterning, is not discarded or ignored or denied. It's included.
Yeah.
So, the important part about karma is that it's not what it seems to be. All of this patterning is actually unpatterned. But you don't get to see that it's unpatterned unless you look very, very closely. Or maybe very, very far. But at any rate, to notice, that's one of the keys of noticing, is noticing that the patterning within your experience, immediate, obvious patterning, is itself infinite and transcendental. And and the important part, again, as I said, is that it's easy to have a notion of sort of a netty thing of this is all illusion, it's nothing, but sort of deny it or transcend it, or and it all of the specificity of experience is itself transcendental, actually. So it comes with, it's included, and is in fact the path to discovering transcendence. You discover transcendence through the mundane, through the ordinary, through the present. And so, I agree that the notion of karma is a confusing one. But I think the fundamental factor is what's confusing, the fact that infinity can appear to be finite.
Yeah.
That I think that's the kicker, and that's what confuses people. You look at the Mandelbrot set and you think it looks like something. You're not looking close enough. And the same with all this. You think this looks like something. It actually doesn't. Even while it looks exactly like what it looks like.
Yeah.
So it's a fine point. It's a fine point, and it's I think it's of the essence to come to understand that, to come to see that. I think that's really that one of the main keys to liberation is to see that all of this apparent patterning is actually non-existent, or let's say it's actually transcendental.
Transcendental is better, yeah.
Yeah. It's very easy to formulate a kind of an escapist notion that there's all of this patterning, this karma, and that I've got to get beyond it, I've got to get outside it, I've got to leave it, I've got to turn it off or deny it or shut it down. And that way is a sure recipe for self-defeat, because you'll spin off into fantasy, and there's no liberation to be found in fantasy.
Yeah, I guess it really comes from my misunderstanding of karma, right? I grew up with the 60s hippie thing of karma being a cosmic mathematical table.
Yeah. Well, I think virtually everyone misunderstands it, because to understand it you have to see what it really is.
Yeah.
Which is not a part of the popular lexicon.
When you're involved in it, you can't see it.
Yeah.
The wood to the trees and things.
Hmm.
So instead of trying to get beyond it or get around it or over it, what you said is a recipe for fantasy, then instead then what?
See what it is. Be with it.
Just to accept it as it, just be open to what is happening.
Well, it's not even be open to it, because what's happening, what's present in your experience is present in your experience, whether you're open to it or not. So it's not a matter of some personal stance. That's basically more fantasy. It's a matter of seeing what your experience actually is, and then you'll discover. Experience is very obviously what it is. It's very obviously slippery. It's very obviously unstable. It's very obviously undefinable. Even as it is also very obviously very specific. And all of those things come together. All of those things are a gestalt, and they're all completely obvious in your experience if you just look at it and see it. It's quite clear that experience is unstable. Every instant looks unlike every other instant, even if you're sitting completely still. There's just everything is like slipping away constantly, and that's the actuality. That's very simple and obvious, and nakedly clear, unobscured actuality. The ideas of stability and objectivity and permanence and continuity from moment to moment and all that are fantasy. They are not. That's not. Your experience does not verify that. Your experience does not verify continuity. On the contrary, your experience verifies discontinuity, because you never experience the same thing twice. You look at something that's supposedly objective and supposedly stable and supposedly out there, and you can't possibly experience it the same way twice. It's impossible. So your experience of it, which is all it is your experience of it. An object is not a thing, it's an experience, as far as you're concerned, right? And your experience of it is continually moving, morphing, slippery, evolving, in very subtle but also in very obvious ways. And so that's the nature of experience, is that it's very slippery. It's always, it's dreamlike, it's mirage-like in the sense that it's unstable, undefinable. You can't pin it down, you can't lock it in. It doesn't have continuity. And so since that's the obvious case, it's at least theoretically easy to notice that, unless you're just completely hypnotized and bought into the belief that it isn't so, in which case you sort of have, a self-fulfilling prophecy of blinders on.
So, Peter, karma is, for me, it's a big thing because it's what we deal with in our practical lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think yet I know, I haven't clearly understood the difference between actuality, experience, and karma. But I've been getting into this mode recently where I think that karma, we have the karma that we have and we can't change it. And then I always think, and then I've been thinking about, well, there must be some kind of magic that I can manipulate my karma and make it always pleasant. And so I've been kind of like, those kinds of ideas have been going through my head, and so
you can't. Well, if you're trying to get karma from one condition of partiality to another condition of partiality, you can't do that. In other words, you can't go from unpleasant to pleasant if there's still some unpleasantness that's possible. You see what I mean? In other words,
right.
Because if there's good and there's bad, and you want to get from one to the other, it's not going to do you any good, because you're playing this off against itself, and that can't be done effectively. It's like I want to be happy all the time. I want everything to work all the time. Well, who doesn't? But that's not how things go, right? But if you come to see more profoundly what the circumstances of your experience actually are, you will discover you don't need to change them because they are themselves magical. They are themselves transcendental. They are themselves unstuck. They are themselves inspired and intelligent and meaningful. But as long as you approach it in, as a game of sort of good versus bad, pleasant versus unpleasant, happy versus unhappy, or whatever like that, you won't be able to access the actuality in a way that's effective.
So then experience and karma are two different things?
No. Experience is what karma really is. In other words, this here is experience, right? You're experiencing, right? Karma is the apparent patterning that shows up as the experiencing. In other words, basically anything you could talk about is karma. So you could, any description you could come up with, even a very, very elaborate and sophisticated description, you could say that's karma. Like we're in Kensington, this is the house that it is, and the walls are such and such a color, and this so people are here. In other words, just the whole narrative you can make. That's the karma, that's the pattern that presents. And you could spend the rest of your life describing one instant in terms of the detail. You wouldn't have scratched the surface. But all of that, with all its inconceivable detail, is the karma, the apparent patterning. Now, like we were talking about earlier, the magic part of it is that patterning transcends itself, actually. In other words, all those descriptions are inaccurate. They're oversimplifications. And what it actually is completely beyond what you describe it to be, or what you think it to be, or what you take it to be, while still being just what you experience. You actually experience that beyondness in your experience, but because we don't have words for it, or we're not used to acknowledging it or thinking of it, we typically don't notice it. So all the time you're experiencing this amazing openness and slipperiness and magical transformation and incredible intelligence, meaningfulness is wafting through. All of this is always happening, but we typically don't notice it because we're focusing on the dumbed down part. We're focusing on our narrative of, oh, here we are, another Sunday night, in Kensington, damn, have to work tomorrow, damn, this, that, the other. And it's not that those descriptions aren't true, but they're so hopelessly partial that by focusing on that partiality of the situation, you're cutting yourself off from a fullness that's actually there, which is profoundly nourishing and meaningful and beautiful and exciting and fun and everything else.
So where does the partiality come from? I mean, I don't bring it up.
Yeah, you do. I mean, not intentionally.
Yeah, right.
But your imagination supplies it largely as a result of indoctrination and brainwashing you received as a child.
Does reality put all that out there too? I mean,
yep. Because reality did all that. Uh-huh. But reality also holds the key to how to leave all that, how to stop inhabiting that mode. Because more than that is present, and you have access to that more because you are already there, you're already in that more. Most of your experience is beyond your descriptions of it. All you have to do is notice that fact. Mm-hmm. In other words, most of you is beyond any description of you that you could come up with. I mean, right here, right now, just your experience is that. Just so much of what you are. Just feel yourself, and you'll feel, oh my God, there's all this stuff here that I couldn't possibly put into words. So it's, by that fact, it's beyond the description. But that doesn't make it meaningless, that doesn't make it useless. On the contrary, it makes it very powerful. So you already are beyond the description of yourself. You already have modes of perceiving and experiencing and functioning that are beyond your description of your circumstances, no matter how thorough and elaborate. It's just a matter of taking the leap of acknowledging that, of honoring it, of appreciating how powerful all of this relatively undefined stuff is. With human society, we're completely, what's the word? I want to say Nazis, but that's not quite right. We're fascistly biased against anything that's not describable. Yeah. You're supposed to, who are you? What do you do? Where do you live? Give me the specifics. Come on, tell me. It's like, if you just show up and people think you're an idiot. It's more than just not appreciated or undervalued. It's downright, what's the word? There's a wonderful word for that. A powerful bias. Bigotry. Bigotry. We're bigots. Human society is bigoted against undefinability. And yet, 99.9999, go on as far as you want, of you and your experience and everything is undefined and undefinable. because it's too subtle or weird or slippery or otherwise not addressable by concepts.
And that point 0.00001 isn't worth knowing anyhow. I mean, it's the undefinable.
Yeah.
That's the reality.
Yeah, and that's where the juice is, that's where the power is, that's where liberation is. And you're already there, but you've been browbeat to deny it, to not acknowledge it, and you've been brainwashed to pay attention to this really paltry. Imagine here's a parable. Here's a parable. Suppose you were raised by psychotic people. Probably not too much of a supposition for most of us. Suppose you were raised. This is the story. Suppose you were raised by psychotic people, and in the middle of the room was a Monopoly board sitting there. And anyone would, and there's an ongoing game of Monopoly, like 24/7 for your whole life. And all anyone would ever talk about is Monopoly. They didn't even have words for anything other than Monopoly. And anytime you left the Monopoly board, no one would look at you, no one would notice you, no one would acknowledge you. And you wouldn't even acknowledge yourself because you were busy thinking about the game, because you bought into that too, and you go off and you do whatever you do, and you come back and it's like you're a sleepwalker. You don't even know you did it because you're so focused on the game. You come back and you're in the game again. That's kind of what it's like. There's this tiny little game of human life and describability. What do you do? Who are you? What's your history? What's your job? What do you do for fun? I mean, whatever, like what anyone could put on a Facebook page. Facebook page is the Monopoly game, okay? Real life cannot be put on a Facebook page. And real life is inherently transcendental. And transcendental doesn't mean like, inaccessible or too much or magical and divine, and maybe you'll get there in 100,000 lifetimes. Transcendental simply means it transcends description, it transcends describability, it transcends being captured as this or that, it transcends being pinned down. You can't pin it down. You see a beautiful sunset, what makes it beautiful? You can't pin it down. It's obviously beautiful. It's moving. Why? You can't say. But it's actual, and that actuality, the actuality of why a sunset is beautiful is inherently transcendental, because you can't pin it down, you can't find it, you can't isolate it, you can't capture it and say, yeah, that's what's making a sunset beautiful. This is it exactly, and I'm going to take it home and put it in a box. It's not like that, is it? Mm-hmm. And everything in your life is just like that. All the powerful, intelligent, liberating portions of your being and your experience are undescribable. They're inherently transcendental. And you're already there, you're already in it, but you've been trained to ignore it. You've been trained to just, it's there, but you just don't see it because you're thinking about what you're thinking about, which you've been, brainwashed into doing.
And the brainwashing just keeps going on.
Sure. Yeah, it's self-reinforcing. It's human culture is self-reinforcing because it keeps throwing itself at you through media, through semantic systems. I mean, language is the biggest problem. I don't know if you've ever looked, but I have a page on my website about how we're hypnotized by language. Mm-hmm. Language has an implicit implication that the world is a certain way. Language is made of nouns and verbs, which implies there's things and actions. In actuality, there are no things. That's a fact. In actuality, there are no actions. That's a fact. So right off the bat, language is completely wrong just by its structure. But we don't notice that because we have all this language we've been brainwashed in, trained to talk since the time we were 6 months old or whatever, right? And culture is just constantly throwing language at us and expecting us to respond to keep the call and response going, Oh, hi, how you doing? How are you today? How was your day yesterday? It's like,
Because that is the karma, isn't it? That the
Yes.
way those threads show up in our life is the karma.
yeah, exactly
And
so.
they're not that any more important than anything else that's going on.
Exactly
It
so.
just so happens that that's sort of, the kind of fabric we have on the chair, or
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
But the pattern that's there is more than
Yes.
your description of it.
Yes.
It's
Well,
more
it
than
is
your
part
thought
of
of it.
reality.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it is actually there. It's not that that's not there. It's just that that's very small
Right.
in comparison to the open-endedness. And what's more is that acknowledged part of the patterning is intrinsically finite. It's this or that. It's red, not blue. It's it's happy or
The
sad.
tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. Whereas actuality is not like that. Actuality is ambiguous. It's not this or that. It's don't know. How was the sunset tonight? Don't know. Was it amazing? Yeah. Was it? Have I seen more amazing sunsets? Yeah. I mean, you can't talk about it. You can't pin it down. There's no. You're outside the scale of any kind of simplistic value judgment or any kind of simplistic game structure of assessment. Virtually all of our experience is like that. And so all you need to do is notice that fact, and you're outside of karma, without needing to change it. You're already out, and you're already outside of it. So this is actually easier than it sounds like. It's not like you need to develop a new way of thinking, or you need to get smarter or something. You're already smarter. But the smarter that you are exists in a realm that you can't talk about.
So the way that I understand what you're saying is that I just had this understanding just last week after listening to the 19th talk, where you talked about awareness, and so now I understand that awareness is presence, and awareness is so much bigger than everything that I'm seeing out there, because awareness is the whole data field. It's just everything. And so that's what I'm kind of processing now and trying to get clear about is awareness, and because awareness is much bigger than just a small little thing that data set that's happening out there.
Yeah.
But I haven't. I haven't rested in that awareness. I mean, I feel that it's there, because otherwise I wouldn't be aware of what's happening.
Yeah, of course.
But it hasn't given me any mileage yet in terms of just being detached from what's happening out there and just being.
Well, I recommend don't think in terms of detachment. Think in terms of addition. In other words, you're aware of what you're aware of, but you're also aware of a lot that you can't describe,
Right.
that you can't even think about or talk about, because it's just what you can't. There's no words. It's just whatever. And like you said, the whole data field. There's a very small part of the data field that can be addressed by human discourse, and most of it is just to. Like exactly how does my body feel right now? Well, there's no words. I mean, I could write encyclopedias about how my body feels, and I wouldn't have captured it, because it feels exactly the way it feels, but it's weird textures, of experiential textures. There's no words for experiential textures, and again, most of our experience is like that. So awareness is already engaged in actuality, real-time actuality, right here, right now, that is outside of karma, that is outside of describability. And as you say, if you're aware of it, it's actual. If you're aware of it, it's present. And so this is the trick to get mileage out of it. Is notice that there is, notice that what you're more specifically aware of is present. So, this room is present and people are present and so all the colors you see are present, blah, blah, blah. But notice there's also, sort of go to the edges of that and see, gosh, it's sort of weird and fuzzy and foggy and you can't say what it is, but it's present. It's not nothing. It's something there. And just sort of flirt with that and feel how, and because it's in your experience, there's awareness there. So there's actuality. It's actually present, but it's undefinable. It's a whole other kind of range of characteristics, and the characteristics we usually talk about as humans in language, right? And so just sort of play with that.
Yeah, because you can't really get a handle on where any object starts and where it ends. It's just like all together.
Sure.
And
that's part of the undefinability.
I can't feel any part of an object. It's hard to describe, but
yeah, that's great. That's really good. Just play around with what presence of experience actually is, and all the ways that it is, and it'll be all the ways that you're used to being aware of, obviously, but it's also in a lot of ways, in a myriad of ways that you're not typically used to thinking about or talking about, that are sort of weird and strange and hard to pin down.
yeah,
And
it's a constant for me. It's like I have to, not have to, but I find myself remembering and appreciating or noticing, because I get really off on the narratives, and so I bring myself back, because it's like the force out there for the herd mentality is really, it's myself, but still, I'm describing it in that way.
Yeah. But even though all that's, and you don't need to stop that. Just notice that there's more.
Yeah.
That is there. That's definitely there, and that's fine. It is the way it is. But there's more. There's other things. There's other qualities, actual experience that's there. That's outside of that realm, and just touch that, or flirt with that, or play with that any time that you find yourself able, and
so
that will be powerful.
What is it like to just be with awareness? Like, can you comment on that?
Well, you are with awareness. You can't say what it's like. It's like itself. It's reality.
Yeah. Okay. That's enough.
When I shift off that grid or the structure, the conceptual structure, into the fuzziness of all the unnamed stuff, that's where all the quality is, the juice, the fullness, the feeling. Like I have these not named thoughts, but structures of how I think I feel in my body. I feel this way, and then, but it's just an arbitrary habit. It's a structure that's a habit, and then I just notice it, and then I shift away from it, and then it's this fullness, like this infinite fullness of all the other possibilities of, I could be that way, or this, a billion other ways, and just relax into that possibility of anything instead of on this way.
Exactly. That's liberation. That's unlimitedness. That's openness. That's infinity. That's infinite fullness and completeness, and it's right here, right now. All we need to do is notice it, and not only is it outside of our habitual ways of thinking of things, it's actually inside it too, because once you get to know that more, once you're more familiar with that fullness, you discover that the stories and the small thinking and all that are made of that too. So, but that's the biggie.
There's all this interrelatedness. I mean, everything bouncing off everything
Yeah,
and
everything
being
is,
everything,
yeah.
reflecting, and it's
Yeah, it's a complete non-linear. You can't follow it. You can't make sense of it. It's a complete non-linear, irrational, hyper-intelligent self-interaction with itself. Just
It makes any story instantly non-viable.
Of course. Yeah.
And
I mean, when you begin to see what this is, human discourse becomes very, very silly and absurd.
Well, all human intellectual understanding becomes futile.
Yeah, of course. And is so absurdly partial and inadequate, But, in practical terms, you can go there because you are there. You can go there because you are that. That's what you actually are. So it's so accessible. It's not like you need to build a bridge to it or develop new faculties or facilities or develop new kinds of intelligence. You're already there. So it's easy. It's just a matter of noticing it. Noticing what's outside the box of what you usually maybe usually tend to go to. And there's something outside the box. Just notice that, and all of a sudden it'll show you what it is. It'll show you non-linearity. It'll show you weirdness. It'll show you, magic. It'll show you the way that it is. Because it's very obviously that way. It's very obviously what it is. But you won't be able to say what it is. You won't be able to think it even. But you don't need to think it because you are it, so you can just be it, be in it. And it's liberation, it's fullness, it's healing, it's fulfillment, it's all that stuff, all the famous polyroll at the end of the rainbow is that.
it's extremely healing because
It's the essence of
pain
healing.
just turns into fullness.
Yeah, it's transcendence. It's complete transcendence into fullness, into completeness, into divinity, literally. I mean, that's all human myths and discussion about divinity and God and the Atman and all these elusive carrots on a string that are the epitome of spirituality is just simple. Is nothing other than this actuality of the fullness that's beyond our imagined small description of things. And it's completely available. It's right here, right now. It's completely available. It's just a matter of noticing it.
And the habit that makes us keep coming back is it a matter of evolution or?
In practice it is. For some reason we seem to be drawn to our own small patterning. And we're in the habit of thinking that's valuable or it's challenging, or we're in the habit of thinking there's something to be gotten there, so we keep returning to it even when we discover that there's more. But gradually we mature or evolve or however, who knows, these are all just approximations or sort of mythologizations of the actuality, but eventually we get that there's not really much in this smallness, and we tend to move more completely into the openness, because you see that it's like, imagine living in a vast, huge paradise, and there's like a small outhouse in the middle of it, and and the door's standing open. You can go in anytime you want. You can hang out there if you want, or you can go out. But why spend all your time in this little outhouse when you can go out into a billion acres of paradise? The Garden of Eden. You can do it, and the outhouse is that too. But after a while, you get to I really don't need to spend all my time in this little outhouse. There's not that much here compared to the lusciousness, which is right here, and they're just beyond this open door. But for some reason, ungraspably, it seems to take a long time for us to come to that realization, even once we've seen the possibility. Our old patterning seems to have a gravity, and we seem to keep going back to it.
It seems to me that we go back for a different reason every time.
Yeah.
It's an infinite. It's more of the infinite.
Yeah, sure.
You can't say I go back because it feels
No.
safe or because it one thing or other.
No, it's ultimately undescribable and unanalyzable. You can't really say why. All of this is just sort of vague metaphors and myths
Yeah.
about the myths of maturing or outgrowing or evolution or all that.
And
It's kind of like that, but you can't say what it is. It just is the
we've
fact.
been brought up to put words on these things, and
Yeah.
they don't mean anything.
Well, here's a question from the internet sort of relevant. In this instantaneous experience of now, how can it even make sense to talk about comparison? The so-called past moment would have to be imagined and then a comparison made with another imagined experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can't be done, and yet we can, pretend that we can do it, and spend the rest of our lives doing it.
You do. Yeah.
So Peter, if all there is infinity, then you don't exist.
Right.
Nothing exists.
Yes, that's correct. But not as a cancellation. It's not that I don't exist like you erase me. It's like I don't exist because when you look at me, you're actually seeing infinity. And infinity looks like me.
Well, there's.
But you can't say what that is because it's infinite. So, in other words, it's an inclusive. I don't exist, but any aspect of what I seem to be is included in the infinity and the infinite that is my actuality. Or that is let's say the actuality. Calling it my actuality is silly. Because I don't exist. I don't exist. Nothing exists. Only infinity exists.
Do you exist as a form or an object, or what do you exist as?
There are actually no forms and objects. Apparent forms and objects are just an artifact of the nature of infinity. It's the nature of infinity that if you look at it a certain way, it seems to show up as forms and objects. But if you look at it other ways, it doesn't.
Okay. And the other way is?
Well, there's lots of ways. Can't be said.
Okay.
Very infinite ways.
Yeah. There's infinite ways that infinity can look at infinity.
Okay. All this.
Oh, and that's what this is. Does this look the same color to you?
No. They do look the same pattern.
You know what that is? It's the, the museum in Golden Gate. Art museum.
So
Yeah.
Peter, everything that I'm aware of is just right here.
Yes.
Because it's all just me.
Yes. Yes. And then you look more closely and you discover that even though everything is right here and it's all you, there isn't really a here and there isn't really a you. It's just this.
Okay. I think I can work with that.
From my point of view, Peter, it seems like I can get that except for certain exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where I'll kind of be going along and then I'll hit something
Mm-hmm.
that seems like it has more substance than anything else.
Sure.
And so I just, have to keep plowing through that until I'm on the other side, and then there's another.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know whether there'll become a time where I just don't have the,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, individually, you'll discover that for you there will be a lot of areas or modes where it's just very easy and effortless to see this, and other modes where you just keep banging your head against things. And it's just the proclivity of your own individual, energy system or whatever, that it happens to be like that. So, in other words, you have your own individual challenges or most challenging energy aspects or whatever, hard to qualify. And so they're sort of the acid test or the final straw of of being able to get through that even, or stopping trying or whatever.
I mean, it's almost like we need to have those. They're useful in the sense that I get to see where these areas still exist, but there also seems to be kind of this dichotomy in a sense that it's the all or nothing. So when I'm there, I'm completely absorbed in that experience, and when I'm not, I'm not. And
so that's valuable, because then you get that switch, and so the more you go through that switch, the more you get to understand it and really see what it is, rather than just be subject to it or be passively stuck with it.
And it seems to be now that the space is much more, and then things when they become a much bigger, so that I'm just completely shut down and then expanded.
Sure. Yeah, but exactly. But you're seeing that mechanism as it actually is, which is wonderful, because that's a good sort of learning experience.
Well, almost in the sense that when I'm in these experiences of limitation, they impact me on all dimensions. In a very powerful way. And then they just in the next moment, almost they can just be gone.
Because it's all a magic trick.
Flipping back and forth.
It's kind of a magic
trick. Where you
trick.
see it, you don't see it. You see it. Sort of like you can go either way at any time. And then, so I suppose my question from that is why that's happening. Is that reality trying to kind of check something out, or
it's like a fine tuning,
seeing itself in the mirror, one of those trick mirrors where it's like, okay.
I mean, for you it's like a fine tuning, or like a finishing school kind of thing, like a final exam, where you're being sort of thrown at these things very clearly, just think of it like an IQ test or something. See,
right.
Here, take this. See how you handle that, kind of thing.
Well, the family stuff is pretty big.
Oh yeah. For everyone, that's usually a last bastion.
Well, and there's a part of me that just says, just avoid it, just forget it, just avoid it, just forget it, just don't look at it. Which I'm not sure if that's like just denial or avoidance, or my old proclivity to try to just stay out of the way of danger, or whether that is in fact reality. I mean, it is all reality, I see that, but...
Well, it can be a good coping strategy. Ultimately, it's not a final strategy, because ultimately you have to include everything. But on the other hand, staying out of situations that are most provocative gives you more chance to build up your strength, so to speak, in the openness. So, and the more strength you have in that, then the more sort of firepower you'll have to bring when you do go in and finally take on that.
Because I've seen from recent experience too, like with my mother's death, for example, that there's nothing that when it's time to do that, it's very clear that it's time to be there. And that when I was in that experience, it was like being inside of a wave, where there was just nothing else to do. That's all there was to do, and it was very clear. And so this vacillation, which sometimes happens about should I jump, should I not jump, should I jump, should I not jump, really becomes kind of null and void, because I suppose I'm interested to see what that is about, this intellectual back and forth about things, as opposed to when reality strikes, we know there's no question that's what we do.
Yeah.
We just do it.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
drive the car. We stop at the lights.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I feel like I trip myself up a lot unnecessarily with fantasy, I guess.
Sure. But being with that is the way out of that is through, of course. So being with that is its own solution. Because the fact that you're even aware of it is wonderful.
Well, I can't not do that. Because it's so evident these days.
Yeah.
You know.
So that's great. So the fact that you're engaged with that is its own solution, even if it's not clear at the time.
Yeah. It does seem to be isolating in many ways. Maybe that's part of the part.
Sure, of course.
That I
Everything.
and in a sense, what I'm also seeing is that the world is getting smaller. It appears to be getting smaller, although it isn't, because it doesn't really require me to go and do things to be aware of the bigness of everything.
Right.
So, but in some ways, it looks like pulling away from experience of the normal world.
And one thing you'll notice in retrospect, if not at the time, is that your experience always takes you exactly where you need to be. So whenever you're engaged with anything or something's coming up, that's what you're supposed to be engaged with. As your in other words, you don't need to second guess the flow of events, the flow of experience. It is always exactly right. It is always exactly doing the most. It's like water going downhill. Water doesn't come to a point and wonder, well, let's see, should I go left or should I go right? It just knows, no, gravity's going that way, I'm going that way. It's no question.
Right.
And our experience is like that. It unerringly goes exactly where it needs to go to get where it's going.
Yeah.
And so whatever seems to be coming up in your experience, even if it seems to be a real conundrum or something very difficult, is exactly where experience needs to be to most efficiently do its process. You're calling it doing its process is very silly, of course, but.
So for examples, I do this too. What Lily was talking about is, denying or putting off, procrastinating. It seems like it's interesting to notice what denying is, not so much what you're denying.
Right.
Because that doesn't exist, operate. But the experience of denying exists. Right? I mean,
sure.
It's happening.
Sure.
So, how do you, how do you look? Because everything's happening so fast, you might, but how could you look at a specific experience like that? What would you try to notice about it?
Just be with it in its fullness. So you don't need to notice anything or isolate anything or do anything about it. But again, it's the process of experience does itself in the maximally efficient mode. So if you're going through motions like that, that's exactly what you should be doing, and you'll be doing it in exactly the right way. intrinsically.
Right.
But again, denial in those kinds of modes can be on one hand an education in the possibility of that, and an education in the ineffectiveness of fantasy, and can also be a delaying strategy, a coping strategy of holding back while you marshal your resources, so to speak.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different ways to look at that. But again, always just be with whatever you're experiencing as unqualifiedly as you can. Because denial isn't really denial. Nothing is really anything. And seeing that is ultimately the solution of any condition. In other words, for denial to be denial, there would have to actually be something that is a certain way. There would have to actually be a you that was denying it,
right,
or trying to get out. And all of that, none of that is actually what it seems to be, or what you're maybe holding it to be, in terms of that narration or description, right? So.
Yeah, so I guess that's why. So being open.
Yeah.
Or being with it.
Yeah.
Is the only thing you can do, because you can't describe it. You can't.
Yeah. Yeah, and seeing that is ultimately the solution to it. You don't need to stop it. It's not like you need to stop. Not like you need to never have denial, but denial stops being a problem when it stops being denial, and it never was denial.
Yeah.
So you just have to see that fact. The solution to all problems is to see they don't actually exist in the terms in which they present themselves, rather than actually solving them or stopping them or fixing them.
Yeah, I sort of say, sort of like seeing through it.
Yeah, sure.
In a sense.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, and denial is really only holding ourselves away from reality.
Well, it's complicating it.
Yeah.
It's complicating
or
it.
else, what we imagine is that we're actually holding ourselves away from another structure of knowing which is equally or as valuable as the one we think we're not having, when in fact neither of them are the case.
Right, and the holding away is just imaginary, because you can't actually hold yourself away from anything.
Right.
So the whole thing is
it's
just a very baroque.
What is that gap?
Well, it's not really a gap, is it?
Well, what's that apparent gap?
It's fantasy.
Uh-huh. I think that gap, that apparent gap, is sort of an area where that if I could just throw an arrow into that, it would just be.
Have at it. All these kinds of talk, like denial and all, we're so used to strategizing in terms of positioning ourselves with regard to our circumstances. But first of all, there's no yourself, and second of all, there's no circumstances. So the entire thing is a complex exercise in insanity. And the solution to it is not to solve it, or even to stop doing it, but to see that it doesn't exist as such, and it's hence irrelevant. Like, it's easy to approach spirituality in terms of, I need of self-improvement. I need to fix myself. I need to fix my bad thinking. I need to fix my emotional body. I need to, this, that, and the other. But all of that is hogwash. Spirituality is simply about seeing what you actually are, which removes all those issues without changing anything one iota. You can still be in denial and be lazy and be this and be that, and it just doesn't matter because it's pure light. It's literally nothing but pure light. And in that context, it's like, who cares, I mean, it's like you dream about the crazy person, and it's not like you need to heal them or give them therapy or something. They don't exist. And we are the same way. The individuality that we're obsessed with and we worry about and we try to fix and we try to solve and we try to get out of our emotional difficulties and all this, it's the same thing. It's like trying to trying to cure a crazy person you're dreaming about. There's no one there to cure. It doesn't matter. All you need to do is see that you're dreaming, and then the whole thing, who gives a shit if you're dreaming about a crazy person? They don't exist. And you are literally like that. You don't exist. Your problems are not really problems because there's no you. And so the solution to your problems is to see that fact, not to solve them.
Yes.
And you can't solve them. You can't solve the problems of a crazy person in a dream.
A puzzling thing, one of many, but a big one, is if all of this is infinity,
Yes.
and all of me is infinity,
Yes.
why is my vantage point just from here?
Because here isn't really here. Here is infinity as well.
Okay, well, so why does it always look to me like this is the only vantage point I have? Why is my vantage point not infinite?
It is infinite. You're not noticing that it's infinite. You're thinking that it's here in relation to what? Is there some there? And when you say it's here, look more closely at what you're referring to when you say that. Can you find an actual here? Is it localized? I mean, it's a...
No, it's not localized, but it's disgustingly familiar.
Yes, it's familiar, and surprising and unfamiliar, maybe? Startling? Occasionally, like every instant?
What's that?
Occasionally, like every instant?
I don't know. It feels very much like, the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, it may be that that's a failure to notice alternatives that are also present. There may be newness present. There may be surprisingness present. There may be differentness present. And it may be that you're in the habit of going to what seems to be sameness, or seems to be constancy, or seems to be whatever, familiarity. Can you find any unfamiliarity anywhere in your field of experience?
Oh yeah.
Well, then what's up with that? So that's here too.
Yeah.
So just focus on that, and then see where the sameness is in relation to that. When you discover openness, it proves to be the basic condition even of what seems to be closed. So even what seems to be closed or dull or constant or stuck turns out to be made of openness intrinsically. But you may not notice that if you're shutting yourself off from noticing openness and just sticking with the sameness. Whereas if you notice the openness, you get, oh yeah, wow, and then sort of from that vantage point, look back at the littleness and see what it looks like. Just play around with it. And the main point is to explore your experience and see how many different ways you can see your experience. In other words, explore the mobility that you have within your experience. And it's very easy to sort of be like a horse that just always goes the same track back and forth. But it doesn't have to.
It always feels like my experience. Why if all this is infinity soup,
Yeah.
why can't I have your experience?
What makes you think you don't? You're just calling it my experience.
Yeah, I'm calling this my experience.
You're calling it your experience, but you can't suppose that's limited because you don't know that there is any experience outside of that. In fact, you know for a fact that there is no experience outside of it except your fantasy of it. You see what I mean? In other words, you can fantasize that I'm over here experiencing something. Like I can fantasize you're over there experiencing something, but I can't know that.
Right. that's just the assumption that
Yeah. It's an
it's
assumption
arrived with.
that you make as the omnipotent intelligence the sole inhabitant within your reality, which you're of course empowered to do. You can make any assumption you want because you're the queen of your reality. But don't let your assumptions trap you or make you feel smaller, because there's no need for that. Because they get their power from you. The assumptions are powerful only because you're having them, not because they have any power in themselves at all. In other words, you're entertaining them as possibilities, so you're giving them whatever power they have. So they don't have any power to trap you because they're delegates of your authority. See what I mean? Why don't we take a little 10-minute break? We'll be back shortly. I recommend you get some tea, online people. We're back online.
It says it's live.
Noticing is a very useful tool, and yet there is nothing to notice.
Yeah.
Which is
noticing is the discovery of that.
Exactly. Noticing that you don't. I mean, when you try and notice, like a glass of water, you're missing the point. It's noticing that there isn't a glass of water.
Noticing is essentially the path of discovering what noticing is.
Yes.
And you discover that what it is transcendental and is this that has always been happening. So that's what calling it noticing is very appropriate, because in a certain sense it eats itself. It's like the famous stick that you use a stick to stir the fire, and the fire consumes the stick. So you use noticing to see what's going on here, and you discover what's going on here is and has always been noticing, and it's always been noticing itself. So there's no need to do any noticing, because it's what's already been happening. It's all very paradoxical to try and sort out, but nonetheless that's irrelevant, because empirically it's doable.
Oh, very.
So you don't need to worry about, you don't need to trip yourself up with the impossibility of theory. Just do it anyway. Don't let the fact that it is inconceivable to do keep you from doing it. And noticing is particularly appropriate too, because the entirety of spirituality consists of discovering what is already the case. So it's not doing anything new whatsoever. It's not doing anything you're not already doing. It's not already happening. It's just coming to notice and appreciate what it is, which it's also already always doing. So the whole thing is very paradoxical and confusing to try to analyze or describe, but nonetheless it's doable, and it just comes from appreciating. A way to prime the pump is just to notice that your experience consists of much more than you're used to acknowledging, and flirt with that and see where that takes you. See how far you can go with that.
While trying to refrain from labeling.
No, you don't need to refrain from anything. Label all you want. Because the labeling doesn't get in the way of anything transcendental, because the transcendental transcends the labeling. Labeling is over here, that's happening over here. So, and then once you get familiar with that transcendental and you come back to the labeling, you discover it's transcendental too. Although you may not notice that at first. You don't need to avoid anything. You don't need to not do anything. It's the essence of simplicity. It's the lazy man's, forgive me, ladies, lazy person's approach to spirituality. Nothing you need to do.
The lazy woman's approach.
Lazy woman's approach. Lazy man's approach.
So being lazy rather than being one of the 6 sins is actually the path to enlightenment can be.
Well, all the sins are actually the short path.
Okay.
They're labeled sins by orthodoxy to keep people under their heel.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Gluttony works.
Of course,
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
You learn a lot from gluttony. Extreme behavior and extreme experience is always very educational.
That sounds so good, wouldn't it? Enlightenment through gluttony. Really sounds so good.
So, Peter, what you just talked about, that there's nothing to notice. I understand that to mean that there's really no reason to inquire.
Right. The reason to inquire is to discover the fact that there's no reason to inquire.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's an absolute fact. And it's an interesting assertion, but it's a powerful fact. And through inquiry, you discover that fact. So through noticing, you discover that you don't need to notice, and also that there's nothing but. But you might not discover that if you don't do noticing. Or you might.
Yeah, or it just happens that you notice that you don't have to notice, or that inquiry.
Right, sure.
Because it just seems like inquiry is just, there's just no end to it, and it never resolves into anything that
Right.
is,
Yeah.
I mean, it just seems like a futile effort.
Yeah, absolutely nothing ever resolves into anything.
And it's, yeah.
That's the nature of infinity, is it doesn't resolve.
Mm-hmm.
You're always just in the middle of you don't know where, and then you go somewhere else, and lo and behold, there you are in the middle of you don't know where. And you go thrashing around and go everywhere and look everywhere, and you're still in the middle of you don't know where.
And it just, there's never-ending inquiry if you do it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not futile.
But yeah, I was going to ask, why is it futile?
Huh?
Why is it futile?
Do you want me to answer
Because you
that?
don't get anything from it.
But the actual experience of being verifiable and discovering that is the most valuable thing,
Sure.
I would say. Which is the difference between happening to notice and noticing that you're noticing. Would you say?
It's hard for me to parse that, but
Maybe because you often just say that we can see that this is not nothing. This is something we can't say what it is.
This is very specifically itself. This is very
Right.
specifically
But
something.
we can notice that. We can actually apprehend
absolutely.
that and
Absolutely.
ascertain that. And so that is what we get from this experience of exploration, which sometimes we may stumble upon it, but we don't.
Absolutely.
But to actually go there, to go on the expedition and to reach the pot of gold is in and of itself a very useful sort of thing to do.
Yeah, it's the only useful thing. It's the epitome of human endeavor.
Aren't we all on that path?
Life is that.
Sorry?
Life is that.
Yeah, I mean, from the moment you're born, you're on that path.
Yeah.
But to intentionally move in that direction, knowing that that's what you're doing, is in some ways, it seems to me to be more valuable than just happening to stumble along.
Not really, because you ultimately, whatever you think you're doing, you're wrong.
Right.
And when you discover what this is, you discover how wrong you were all along about what you thought it was and thought you were doing.
Right.
But that doesn't make it not valuable or irrelevant.
No, but
being wrong is fine. Being wrong is the very mechanism of realization.
Yes, but in a sense, once you discover that, you just go back to stumbling along anyway.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's sort of not. It doesn't bring about a change in.
So the change that it brings about is the recognition that there's no resolution.
Yeah. The certainty of what this is, which is an absolute completeness, which is absolutely intrinsically unresolvable. But it doesn't need to be resolved because it's a completeness. It's intrinsically resolved.
Knowing the unknowable.
Yeah, knowing that the unknowable is the unknowable completely, and there's an entirety. There's no loose ends, or you could say nothing but loose ends. But that there's nothing but loose ends, it no longer is a loose end. you get to the end, and the end is that there is no end. But that is the end. That is the fact. The fact is that there is no fact. But you get that. Yeah, there is an end. It's fun to wax poetic about it. But the point is to do it, to see. It's to see.
I think for me, the only thing I can really feel is awareness.
Mm-hmm.
I can't feel anything more than that.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, awareness can be called anything, but that's about all that I can really kind of. It's right here.
Yeah, that's all there is.
So everything else that's happening, in patterning, is just happening, and it's there's no meaning in it in terms of being with reality.
Mm-hmm.
If I can articulate.
There's no meaning in it in its own terms. The meaning is that it is appearing.
Yeah.
The meaning is that it is present. The presence is the meaning.
Okay.
And presence is awareness, as you say. So the present awareness is the meaning of all experience. Experience is just the demonstration, the explication of the presence of awareness.
Yeah.
It's much better not to worry about the theory of all this and just stay with the practice. Just be with the texture of your experience.
Shaking his hand, getting ready for the...
Because even the tip of the iceberg is just, there's just so much that, that in itself just becomes, fantastic, and you can just sort of...
That is the path. The path is the noticing that there's more.
Yeah.
That's simple. That is the entirety of the path, is noticing that there is more. Whatever you experience, be with that experience and you will find more.
Yeah.
Endlessly. That is the entirety of the path.
Even my awareness that that's a tip of I'm just saying tip of an iceberg, but it could be, I could call it anything. But that it means I already know. I mean, right. I'm already experiencing that there's more.
Yeah. Well, that's always a part of experience, and that's why I call it noticing, because it's already the case. You just notice it, and as soon as you notice there's more, then they're gone, because there's more than that and more than that and more than that forever. Yeah. And you discover openness, you discover infinity, you discover limitlessness, you discover eternity, etc., etc. Right here.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know where else it would be. Here, right? But yeah, I know what you mean.
Well, that's a very, that's an artful practice, or if you could call it a practice, to be able to experience more in this.
Sure.
You know, it takes, for me, it doesn't come easy to me to experience more. I mean, I can't say that I can't say that I can really do that, but I'm always striving to understand more of what's happening in my awareness. And I mean, I know there's always more happening, there's always more patterning, there's always more apparition. And
Yeah.
that's about as more as I can.
But that's the only more you need. So whatever you're experiencing, be with it and notice that whatever you're noticing you're experiencing, there's also more there to be noticed.
Yeah.
And right there, that's where the moreness starts. And there's no limit, there's no end to how much more there is. So whatever you're noticing, there's more than you're noticing. And there's more than that. And more than that. And more than that.
Are you talking about the more of apparition or the more of actuality?
But they're one and the same.
Okay. Because I'm talking about the more of apparition.
Yeah, they're one and the same. Apparition is actual. This apparition is actual.
Yeah.
This is actual. But it is an actual infinity. It's not an actual limited reality constructed of finite objects.
Right. It's a more presence.
Yeah, absolutely. Presence is limitless. Presence is infinite. Infinitely detailed, infinitely nuanced. Mm-hmm. And in that infinity, there is unending difference. So when you notice more, in an apparition, when you notice more, the more it sort of spins off a little bit. It adds new information. It has a twist to it. And then another more adds another twist, and all of a sudden, phew, you're just somewhere entirely different than where you thought you started from.
Yeah, it's sort of like looking through a kaleidoscope. I mean, the apparition is like the little chunks or whatever is in the round kaleidoscope. And that's what I was focusing on. That's what I was saying. Just that sort of, to me, is like the tip. And then you're right, you just go off.
You can explore distant galaxies by looking at some dirt on the table.
Yeah, yeah.
Because there's no limit to the richness you can find in any experience, and more than that, and so you can voyage on that. You can surf that moreness unendingly, and that is the path. That is the path. Is enjoying this moreness. And the more you enjoy it, the more skillfully you will notice that there is even yet more to enjoy. So you're gaining. It's a never-ending increase.
That's where it becomes interesting. Is that the enjoyment, the blend between enjoyment and understanding.
Yeah, they're one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's said in many very profound spiritual traditions that the absolute quality is bliss, and this is absolutely true.
Yeah.
The essence of experience is joy of unlimited enjoyment. And the only way you can find limitation in experience is by imagining it into existence, because there ain't none to be found if you actually look.
So the thinking facility, there is a thinking facility of capacity.
Sure.
And that's what's dreaming all the mental concepts, right?
Maybe, sure. I mean, it's certainly reflecting them.
So, So when we think of all the we label and caption everything. That's the thinking capacity doing it, and that is what you're talking about when you if we notice, then the conceptual models are just, they're not. I mean, what am I trying to say here?
In noticing the conceptual models are transcendent. You see that they're fine as far as they go, but they don't go far at all. And then you notice that actuality of experience includes what you're labeling, but that's just a starting point. And it goes, it takes off unlimitedly in every direction.
So the thinking capacity keeps going. It's just that the noticing is noticing the more of that experience, even though the thinking is going on.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, because thinking, conceptual thinking can only deal in approximations.
Right. Okay.
And experience is actual. And experience is infinitely fine, infinitely detailed. And the approximations have a ceiling, a threshold of maximum information where they sort of fuzz out and stop. In other words, the thinking gets stupid real fast when it tries to follow infinity. So it gets left behind. But that's fine. It doesn't need to stop. It just stays where it was.
Mm-hmm.
But thinking is a small event in the vastness of experience. The field of experience is vast, and thinking is just a relatively small portion of that. That's to think of it sort of spatially. So it's not particularly important.
Yeah, and it's more linear too.
Yeah, it's linear, it's relational, it deals in the relationships of posited finite affinities. And it's fine as far as it goes, but it doesn't go very far because it only deals with very sloppy approximations.
Right.
It's like trying to do some very precise science with only integer values, rounding things off to integer values. It's not untrue, but it just doesn't go very far in terms of experimental results. And so say the guy is notating his experiments as rounding everything off to integers, but you're over here with the instrumentation and it's giving you all these very precise readouts. They completely transcend the integer values. The integer values aren't wrong, they're fine as far as they go for rounding offs and approximations, but they don't go very far. And the information that is concealed in the much more precise measurements is profound, is meaningful. And likewise with the conceptual, the rounded off, oversimplified, dumbed down conceptual versions of things is not untrue, but it's just woefully incomplete and inadequate. It just does. There's so much that it excludes in terms of fineness and detail and nuance, and that fineness and detail and nuance is literally bottomless. There's no limit to how far it can go, and the farther you go with it, the more is revealed. That completely transcends the sort of dumbed down version that might be a starting point.
So it's not about the content at all.
It's not about the content as it's described. It's about the actual content, which is actually the substance.
The accuracy.
Yeah, the detail, the substance. I mean, it says, the old saying, the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
The devil is the principle of revelation. Yeah. So the revelation is in the details. The devil is that which makes trouble for the orthodoxy.
Can I ask you a Togol question?
Why not?
I just started looking,
Hmm?
and it seems to me that it is almost synonymous with astral travel or some dimensional movement, and I didn't expect that. So that it's like being in a river and
Yes.
things it flowing and changing and
Yes.
always the same but always different.
Yeah. And the essence of it is becoming sensitive to the fineness of that flow.
That's right.
And it's sort of the practice initiates an instantaneous feedback, because depending upon the quality of your experience, you can sort of fine tune your own subtlety with being with it. So you develop facility with being able to be with it, like in a higher frequency, you might say, or a more refined precision, because as it shows you how to by being with it, by being in it. In other words, when you get too heavy-handed with it, you know right away, because all of a sudden
Yes.
but the more finally you settle into it, the more it enlivens and opens up and continues. So.
But isn't that the same as? I mean, astral travel has got all these connotations, but.
Well, it might be. It depends exactly what you mean by that.
That's difficult to describe.
I mean, it's imprecise what that phrase refers to.
Yes,
it probably means
it
different
means,
things to different people. But
for me, it means going from the here and now to the here and now. There's no word I can use to describe it.
It's being with the finer dimensions of this. And to ultimately be with the most primal dimensions of this, to be with primal radiance as primal radiance, rather than at a remove of a more coarse inversion, let's say, or called the lower frequency version, although that's very imprecise.
So it gets more and more fine.
Yeah, well, it clarifies. As you develop the capacity to be with it more and more finely, it clarifies that you find yourself more established in that dimension.
Mm-hmm.
It clarifies, it gets clear, it gets more present, more explicit.
Mm-hmm.
Like tuning a TV or something.
The radio.
Tuning a radio, yeah.
Get on the channel and not on the channel.
And it's definitely being with, penetrating the dimension of this apparition to a finer dimension of it, where it's more primal, and going into the primal radiance.
Mm.
I mean, that's what Togel is. Literally, it's going into the primal radiance until it's going up the butt of reality to the core of things, to the very primal radiance, to the point where it transcends even radiance.
Yeah.
I mean, it said that it's the termination of Togel is the extinction of phenomena, which means that the radiance itself stops as radiance.
Because I'm experiencing.
Does that ever happen?
Huh? I don't know.
Ever happen? We don't know.
Don't know. It doesn't. It's not important, because it's not that it's an event so much as it's a perspective.
Because I'm very conscious of this flow of energy.
Yeah. It's a very dynamic flow of very, very subtle, energy.
Energy is not the right word.
Right.
But
Well, radiance.
radiant.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's going to be a fascinating trip, I think.
Yeah. Well, the Tibetans say it's the ultimate. That's the secret, most secret, the most high practice. It's said that if you complete that practice, your body disappears. So as a sign of completion, your body bursts into a rainbow. So we'll all be watching.
He's going to turn into a rainbow.
Well, there already is a rainbow.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But it becomes explicit.
We'll be right there with you, John, right?
Yeah, you're qualified to practice it because you have the starting point.
Well, it seems to me that anybody can practice it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's easy. It's easy to do, but to have the value of it, to appreciate it, let's say, in its actual context, you have to be starting from a point of absolute non-relationality.
Yeah, right.
Otherwise, you'll have a subtle tendency to concretize it as some kind of an experience.
Yeah,
and that kills it.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't stop the phenomena, but it kills it in terms of a value. Because it stops being a real journey and just becomes a curiosity at that point.
It feels from that reading that you've got on your website, I can't remember the name of it, but that is the beginner's guide. And it feels like there must be more.
Well, the practice itself is the guide.
Okay.
That all in the instructions is how to start, how to prime the pump. Yeah, and once it's on, then it becomes its own explanation. It's a journey that, the important thing is to start the journey, and where to go and how to go there comes with. The important part is starting, getting your foot in the door.
Yeah. I was reading today the Trials of St. Anthony. Not the Trials, but I can't remember what the name is, but
right.
But he went through the same. This description was very similar to my experience of what I've just had a glimpse of.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting because that was all from a very Christian perspective.
Sure, yeah. I mean, these phenomena are inherent in what we are, inherent in experience itself. So anyone can stumble onto them. And then the interpretation you have with how you might talk about it is going to reflect the framework you're obviously speaking from.
Yeah, he went off into devils and all sorts of biblical references that I had no knowledge of.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of versions of it, Like, for example, on a slightly lower level in the Tibetan tradition, they have the Shitra, which is the visions of the peaceful and wrathful deities, it can be engaged in as a visionary practice while alive, but also as a spontaneous occurrence after death. That at a certain point, the raw energies begin to appear, and they'll have a tendency to be interpreted as peaceful or wrathful. In other words, as sort of promoting harmony or being cacophonous, because it's the nature of the different possibilities of energy to be so. Togel is being with that same energy, but at a level prior to the interpretation where it collapses into peaceful and wrathful, and it's just radiance. So, in other words, it's a higher level of being with the same radiance.
Well, the Olds, whatever they called, Robert and Rachel Old, who wrote that
Right.
book, talk about the peacefuls and the wrathfuls
Right.
not coexisting, but my interpretation has been that they're one and the same,
Yeah.
but they appear to be slightly different.
Yeah, because it's like yin and yang, or harmonious and cacophonous, or whatever. There's different possibilities of the flavors of the energy interacting with itself.
Yeah.
And it's intrinsic that will be revealed when you look at the energy. Of course, it's always being revealed in any aspect of experience. Of course, experience is that. If you look in your experience, you'll find areas that are sort of smooth and placid, and you'll find areas that are jarring and tense, and because it's in the nature of the energy to show up that way. It's intrinsic in what it is.
Yeah, like Susan was talking about happy and unhappy.
Right, yeah, all that. But then when you get that those aren't actual conditions so much as they're just intrinsic aspects of what the energy is like with itself, then it collapses as having anything to do with any circumstances, and it's just seen as the radiance shows up as that. It's like a symphony where there's moments of just great beauty and then moments that are crashing and smashing and, great event. But it's all just music. It's all just music. It's not about anything.
Seems to me like a roller coaster. You get on and have a ride.
Yeah, absolutely.
But actually it doesn't take you anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe
Well, it takes you very literally nowhere.
It takes you literally nowhere. Maybe you're going to end up as a rainbow, but it doesn't seem that way. It seems like entertainment. Not quite entertainment, but it's...
Well, it's discovery, because
It's discovery, yes.
you're being with the energy more and more nakedly. And it's said that to do Togel properly is a very extended, ongoing thing of being with it. So you're starting off at a point of very subtle experience and going on from there with great application.
Yeah.
Now, see how far you can take it. And then Togel practice per se takes it to the end of the line. But even just experiencing what it is very
But there
profound
is
and powerful.
no end of the line.
No, okay, there's a beginning of the line.
Okay. There's a line.
Yeah. Obviously, it transcends words from the get-go. But talking about that in terms of this very specialized practice is really only, a specialized way of looking at it. The same considerations apply just with experience right here, right now. Of being able to be with your experience as, flavors, energy qualities, textures, whatever, and you can be with it in that, as that, more and more subtly, more and more immediately, and you discover that the energy of your experience is all, it's like a symphony, it's all part of itself. And very quickly your experience transcends circumstances and separate objects and separate situations and events, and turns into like music of different flavors of energy that are dancing and evolving and sort of morphing within themselves as an incredible display of a transcendental intelligence, very non-linear, not something you could describe or put into words, but profoundly meaningful and infinitely deep. And you can be with your experience that way, right here, right now. It doesn't involve any sort of a, sophisticated practice or anything. You just notice that what is present as your experience has texture, has qualities, has a liveliness, a life to it, a meaningfulness to it that is completely accessible. It's right here.
It's really freeing to go with the flow of it, the slipperiness of it, rather than, the tendencies to hold on to one moment of it and extend that, into an interpretation. Instead, it's just
That's the essence of liberation, is to discover the freedom that this actually is. This is intrinsically a freedom, it's intrinsically spontaneous, it's doing itself, it has no resolution, it's just unendingly opening into new, implications of configurations of itself, just momentarily touching on nuance, suggestion of nuance, and then moving into other, implications with astounding vitality and spontaneity and intelligence, but with nothing at all, nothing anchoring it.
No agenda.
I mean, it is itself. Its agenda is to be itself, and it already is that. So its agenda is accomplished just in this radiance.
So when you talk about the Tobo practice, so that helps you understand the energy.
Yes, you're seeing the energy very nakedly, very primally, very subtly, and then staying with it, and sort of it's like an extreme sport of being with it, more and more and more subtly, more and more and more finely.
Is that something? So then the Tobo practice is kind of a culmination of noticing.
Yeah, in a way, it's like a very advanced, very refined noticing. Yeah. It's not a better noticing. It's not better in any sense. It's just very, let's say, high level.
And what happens before that? How do you notice the energy, the raw energy? If you're not doing Tobo practice, is there? What does it look like?
What does the energy look like?
No, what I mean, if you're not noticing the raw energy in a more subtle way, like you do with Tobo practice, how would you notice it otherwise? In like the early stage, as it were, of noticing.
Well, how is simply by noticing, starting with whatever your experience is, on whatever level you find yourself being with it, and then however that is, notice that there's more. So that's the starting point. The starting point is however things seem to be to you, no matter how you can be relating to them in terms of a heavy-handed narration and heavy circumstances and stuckness or whatever, it doesn't matter. But so that's your starting point, and then in the context of that starting point, just notice it. Wow, that's here, but there's more. And then right there, you've taken a step into being with your experience more subtly in terms of it's a more open-ended, energetic presence than you were acknowledging originally, than your starting point. See what I mean? Yeah. And then you just you continue with that, just on an ongoing basis.
Still just noticing.
Yeah, of course. And you discover more how profound noticing is in the course of noticing. I mean, by noticing, you discover what noticing is.
Oh, okay.
So why do they make it the secret, secret, secret? I think they had 3 secrets on the teaching. I mean,
I don't really understand. Partially because they have a theory of transmission, which, according to their theory, gets diluted if it's spread to people that are not qualified to assimilate it. I don't subscribe to that theory myself, but I don't know that it's untrue in its own terms. I don't understand it. On the one hand, and on the other hand, Togel is you can't practice it unless you already basically have realization effectively. So so it's sort of pointless to teach it in far and wide, because people might be you're not doing anyone any favors by giving them.
Isn't the same thing with yoga? There's all these asanas that you can't do until you.
Yeah, perhaps, I don't know. I mean, I don't understand the theory.
I don't understand either.
I mean, I obviously don't subscribe to it. I published the directions on my website.
Yeah.
I'm not a part of that lineage formally, and I've taken no vows of secrecy, of obligation. So I'm not bound by that. So I don't particularly understand it. But I would suppose that from within their point of view, that's what would be said. But the big part of their concern is the dilution. I mean, Dzogchen was a largely every aspect of Dzogchen was a secret tradition until basically modern history, until a few decades ago, 50 years ago or something. And the theory was that twofold. They didn't want people hurting themselves. If you sort of tell everyone it doesn't matter what you do, the stupid people will, arguably, not necessarily. One theory is that stupid people will get themselves into more trouble than if they're following the rules, sort of crowd control. But I think the main theory from their point of view, again, is this whole sort of notion of dilution of the transmission. They think of it as like an electric current or a bucket brigade, where you have water. Yeah, you have so much water, and you pour it out, and you don't want it to get. You want to give the guy you're giving it to a full cup, so he gets the whole juice. And if you're just giving everyone a teaspoonful, they're not getting much of a serving, enough to they lose the power. And I don't subscribe to that. On the one hand, on the other hand, the actuality of spiritual realization is very much about transmission. It's very much about getting it.
Absolutely.
And that happens on a kind of a face-to-face basis. So that's much as actual, but I don't know that it needs to be celebrated or protected or anything, because it's an actuality that's either there or not. It's not something you can fake, and it has nothing to do with teachings or practices. But the Tibetans have a whole tradition of magic and, formal initiations that supposedly confer blessings and transmission and all that, as opposed to the actuality of either it happens or it doesn't, whether or not the formalities have been observed. And so, but they're a kind of bizarre Baroque institutionalized thing like the Roman Catholic Church or something. So it's a little unfathomable to me.
think it's similar to setting up sap songs where you provide a atmosphere or a foundation for things to happen.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, and that's the theory or the attempt. But on the other hand, no matter how much of a environment you set up for things to happen, there's no guarantee things are going to happen. And even if you don't set up the environment, things could happen. So it's more a matter of the actuality, which is an individual experience, rather than the formality of the setting up of it. You know, it's really a question of honoring the formalities versus noticing the actualities. I'm more of an actualities guy myself.
Well, there's also the making it available. If you don't have satsang, you don't put the message out there, the transmission can't happen.
Yeah, well, you need to come up against people for the spark to happen.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that's my theory. That's why I make myself available on the off chance that can happen. You know, and hence all of these various activities and stuff.
Mm.
But that's no guarantee that it will. or that it wouldn't if I didn't. Who knows? It's all very inscrutable.
It seems to me that it's more likely that it will. If you did, then
you'd suppose. If there was any logic to the way things work, that would make sense. Anyway, it's about quitting time, so I'm going to shut down our online. Good night, online people.